All right, so today we're talking about the three branches of government. So the national government, to become law, the Constitution had to be ratified by 9 of the 13 states. In the Federalist Papers, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay argued in support of the Constitution. A key argument was that the division of power made it impossible for one person to have absolute power. Because remember, the US government, the founders were terrified of having a monarch again. They didn't want somebody that would become king. The government was limited by assigning different powers to each branch and providing each with checks over the powers of the others. Under the legislative branch, the enumerated powers of Congress are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which explains what kinds of laws Congress can make. The final clause gives Congress authority to make whatever laws are necessary and proper to carry out its other powers. So this is called the necessary or proper clause, or also known as the elastic clause. So basically it says that Congress has the rights to establish a post office. So if you're establishing a post office, you need to think about stamps, think about employees, think about different types of mail and how it's going to happen. So they make it elastic because it just says establish a post office. But in establishing a post office, there's a lot of other things that goes into that. So they stretch it to make sure that all those other things happen. Under the executive branch, the president heads the executive branch, which includes the departments that enforce the laws passed by Congress. The executive branch includes federal agencies, commissions, government corporations, and boards that carry out specific duties. The president is empowered to grant pardons, make treaties, appoint key officials, and serve as commander-in-chief of the military. We're going to look at all these more in depth. Not today. Judicial branch, Article 3 establishes the federal court system consisting of a Supreme Court and the lower courts. The federal court system hears cases about the Constitution and other federal issues. The judicial branch's power comes from judicial review, which is the court's ability to interpret the Constitution and overturn laws that violate it. This power gives the judicial branch a status equal to the other two branches of government. American governments then and now, President Washington had relatively little to do, while modern presidents have full and tightly organized schedules. The first Congress members introduced fewer than 200 bills and worked part-time, but today Congress members introduce about 10,000 bills each year and work almost year-round. Early Supreme Court justices heard almost no cases and traveled to district courts to hear appeals when the Supreme Court was not in session. Relations among the branches, how they interact. The division of power among three branches requires that the branches cooperate with one another. Executive powers that require cooperation between the president and Congress serve as limits on presidential power. Checks and balances, political parties, and the different kinds of power held by each branch are sources of conflict. So let's look at these checks and balances. So you have the president. So the checks and balances that the president, the executive branch, does on the courts is he can appoint judges and he can also pardon federal criminals. So that's how he can undo or redo something that the judges do. His checks and balances on the Congress are he can veto the bills, he can send it back to him, and he can implement the law. The court's checks and balances on the president, they can rule executive actions unconstitutional, so they can undo something that the president does. And they can preside over impeachment proceedings, which is what we just saw with Trump. Under Congress, he can rule, the courts can rule a law unconstitutional, and they can also rule on the meaning of laws. They can tell us what the law means. Congress, their checks and balances on the president, they can override a veto. So they can reject his veto with 2/3 approval. They can approve or reject presidential appointments. They ratify treaties. So they can say, yes, we agree that we're going to have a negotiation with this country. They can impeach and remove the president, which again is what we just saw. And they can reduce funding for executive agencies. The Congress checks on the courts. They can confirm or deny judicial appointments. They can impeach and remove federal judges, and they can create, regulate, and fund courts. So that's just how they can make sure that they're doing their jobs correctly. And then the last thing I have for you is a video.
And last, the three-ring government.
Gonna have a three-ring circus someday. People will say it's a fine one, son. Gonna have a three-ring circus someday. People will come from miles around. Lions, tigers, acrobats and jugglers and clowns galore. Tightrope walkers, pony riders, elephants and so much more. Guess I got the idea right here at school. Felt like a fool when they called my name, talking about the government and how it's arranged, divided in three like a circus. Ring one, executive. Two is legislative, that's Congress. Ring three, judiciary. See, it's kinda like my circus. Step right up and visit ring number one. The show's just begun, meet the president. I am here to see that the laws get done. The ringmaster of the government. On with the show! Hurry, hurry, hurry to ring number two. See what they do in the Congress. Passing laws and juggling bills. Oh, it's quite a thrill in the Congress. Focus your attention on ring number three. The judiciary's in the spotlight. The courts take the laws and they tame the crimes, balancing the wrongs with your rights. No one part can be more powerful than any other is. Each controls the other, you see, and that's what we call checks and balance. Says, well, everybody's act is part of the show, and no one's job is more important. The audience is kinda like the country, you know, keeping an eye on their performance. Ring one, executive. Two is legislative, that's Congress. Ring three, judiciary. See, it's kinda like my circus. My circus. Gonna have a three-ring circus someday. People will say it's a fine one, son. But until I get it, I'll do my thing. With government, it's got three rings.
You know, I try to find the cheesiest videos. All right. So make sure that you're working on your reading essentials, the discussion question, the quiz, and the assigned Edgenuity module.